How many Australian soldiers died during World War II? The Australian state entered World War II at the moment when Nazi Germany launched an aggressive war against Europe, occupying Poland and posing a threat to the world order. The decision of the Australian government to declare war on Germany was a logical consequence of Australia's membership in the British Commonwealth of Nations, but it meant that a young country located on the edge of the inhabited world was taking on a huge burden of participation in a global conflict of unprecedented scale. During the 6 years of the war, the Australian nation sent almost 1 million of its citizens to the armed forces, which accounted for about 14% of the country's total population of about 7 million people. This mobilization coefficient demonstrates the scale of national tension and the willingness of Australians to sacrifice themselves for the sake of defeating fascism and Japanese imperialism. Australia's participation in the war was unique in the sense that the country was simultaneously fighting in two separate theaters of military operations with completely different opponents and geographical conditions. During the first stage of the war, the main focus was on Britain's support in the fight against Nazi Germany and its Italian ally in Europe and North Africa. Australian troops fought in the sands of Libya and Egypt, stormed fortified positions in the desert, and participated in fierce naval battles in the Mediterranean. However, since the entry of the Japanese Empire into the war in December 1941, the strategic situation has changed dramatically, and Australia faces a direct threat of Japanese aggression off its own shores. The Japanese attack marked a turning point in the Australian history of the war. For the first time during its existence as an independent state, Australia was subjected to direct enemy attacks on its territory. Japanese aircraft bombed Australian cities, Japanese submarines operated off the coasts of the continent, and Japanese troops posed a real threat of invasion in the northern regions of the country. This forced the Australian government to reorient a significant portion of its military resources from the European theater to the Pacific Ocean. Prime Minister John Curtin has openly declared a reorientation of Australia's foreign policy, pointing out that the country's salvation depends more on the support of the United States of America than on British protection. The period from 1942 to 1944 became the most intense and critical for Australia. Australian troops played a leading role in repelling Japanese aggression in the southwestern Pacific Ocean, where they fought in extreme climates: the jungles of New Guinea, the islands of the Solomon Islands archipelago, the shores of Borneo. All this became the theater of a bloody war in which Australian soldiers demonstrated exceptional courage and fighting talent. Australian commanders, such as General Thomas Blay, displayed outstanding military skill in managing operations in such difficult conditions. During this period, Australian troops represented the majority of Allied forces in the region, as American troops were still in the process of mobilizing and deploying to the Pacific. However, as the power of the United States grew, Australia's role in the war began to change. From the middle of 1944, American troops increasingly assumed the main role in strategic operations, and Australia was forced to participate in combat operations on auxiliary fronts. Although these operations were often called secondary, they were by no means less dangerous or bloody. Australian troops continued against the Japanese army in Borneo, Bougainville, and other islands until the Japanese surrender in August 1945. These military actions required the same sacrifices and heroism as the larger operations conducted by the Americans. The cost of Australia's participation in the war was very high. Of the nearly 1 million people who served in the armed forces, 27,073 Australians were killed in direct combat or died of wounds and diseases. In addition, 23,477 people were injured. Many of them were permanently disabled. These figures, although lower in absolute terms than the losses of the great powers, still represented a huge tragedy for a country of such small numbers. In proportion to the population, Australia's losses were very significant and left a deep imprint on the national consciousness. The war led to profound transformations in all areas of Australian life. The country's economy was subjected to mass mobilization and industrialization, which led to the creation of new enterprises and the development of industrial potential. Australia's armed forces have been significantly developed and modernized, turning from a small regional military force into a significant participant in the global conflict. Foreign policy has undergone fundamental changes, with a shift from a British orientation to an American one. Australia understood that its future security depended on a close alliance with the United States, not just on ties with Britain.